If you want your home cinema to feel like a real cinema, you need to hear MAG Theatron. With more than 20 years' experience in commercial theatres worldwide, MAG's award-winning speaker systems deliver the same cinematic impact, now purpose-built for residential use. Made in Ukraine and engineered in-house, up to 95% of every transducer is MAG's own design. From high SPL loudspeakers to infrasonic subwoofers and DSP-loaded amps, MAG Theatron is the real deal. Exclusively available in Australia through Integrate Unlimited. If you've ever wished for a design partner without the overhead, meet Colosseum. Launched in 2024, Colosseum is a white-label design and engineering service built specifically for integrators, whether you're new to the game or running million-dollar installs. They turn basic floor plans into detailed, high-impact cinema-ready documentation, brand agnostic, collaboration first, and led by industry veteran Paul McLean. I've seen the work myself. This is world-class support for serious cinema projects. Colosseum, your behind-the-scenes design team. Hello and welcome to the Master Integrator podcast, the show where we speak with the people shaping the future of the smart home industry. From technology to training, we explore the systems, standards and stories behind the work that brings modern homes to life. I'm your host, Paul Skelton. Before we begin today, a quick thank you to our sponsors, Integrate Unlimited, the exclusive Australian distributor of MAG Theatron, and Colosseum for making this episode possible. Today's guest is Steve Hall, General Manager of Vet and Technical at the Powering Skills Organisation, which is one of the Jobs and Skills Councils tasked with reshaping Australia's vocational education landscape. Steve is at the forefront of national efforts to build real, sustainable pathways into the energy sector, which includes the electrotechnology and smart home industries. If you've ever wondered why there's no official apprenticeship for smart home integration, or what it will take to create one, this conversation is essential. We cover where things currently stand, what's coming next, and why the success of this initiative depends on support from people already working in the industry. This is more than a policy shift. It's an opportunity to secure the future of our profession. This is Master Integrator. Here's Steve Hall. So let's begin a bit with your history in the industry. Who are you, where are you from, and how did you get here?
I love when people ask me that because I love talking about myself, clearly. So I actually started my career in Sydney, in New South Wales. I was one of those kids who got really bored at school. I was good at school, but I actually thought, do I really want to go back? I went back to start year 11 and went, man, 3 hours homework a night. Do I really want to be an electrical engineer or do I want to do something different? And one of my mates has suggested, he says, why don't you think about becoming a sparky? And I went, I like playing with electronic things. You know, one of those kids growing up where I pulled things apart and what happens if I do this? You know, and normally trying to avoid being detected. So like I had one of those little video games. We really show my age now because it was an old school sort of, Star Wars type game, Space Invaders type game. And Mum didn't want me playing it at night. So the first thing I did was pull it apart, worked out how to disable the speaker by cutting one of the wires to it. So clearly had a desire to do that kind of work. And ended up doing my apprenticeship with Wormald's in Sydney, in specialising in the fire industry, which I found really interesting. Probably the best piece of advice I got was have a look at doing your apprenticeship with the fire industry because they specialise in a lot of interesting tech, I guess. They were right at the cutting edge of going from that old school, hardcore, analog way of doing things into more of the sort of digital space. They still called it analog, but in essence, it stopped being as a mechanical switching type world into more of now you have to understand a little bit about data and then how data is transmitted and how to create essentially a TCP IP type network utilizing devices. So you would address things and you'd have to put a program together and you've got your little laptop. We're talking pre-Windows 95 days. So it was, old school text, everything. But I just found it really, really interesting. The side point bonus was that I ended up getting my electrical trade as part of it and became an electrician. So it was some really good career advice for me back in the day, but opened up, I guess, a number of other things that I liked doing. So arguably, the next 20 years was spent doing fire industry type work. So everything from being a technician, electrician, into being an electrical estimator, sales, contract manager. Moved to Western Australia back in 2001. Ended up starting my own company doing fire stuff, and then about 15 years ago decided that I'd had enough of having my own business and working 50, 60-hour weeks and not seeing enough at the in the profit column of the P&L to go, well, maybe I could get into something else. So I sold that business and ended up in the teaching world. And 15 years later, here I am rewriting the training package for the nth time. So it's been a fun 36, 37 years so far, and there's still a couple of years left to go.
So the kid who didn't want to go to school ended up teaching. There's something oddly poetic yet strange about that.
Yeah, the irony doesn't escape me there. That I arguably too had a bit of a knack for being able to talk publicly, and if you like doing that, I could believe they're saying about, was it 90% of people would rather be the subject of the subject of the eulogy than the person giving it, and I'm the 10% that actually loves getting up in front of people and talking. So teaching actually was a great thing, but I guess arguably, and even I guess the work that CEDIA does, and looking at industry as a whole, there's always got to be someone who wants to pass on their knowledge and be part of the journey for other people. That's a big part, I guess, of why I enjoyed teaching after having a business, because I was able to pass on the old war stories and the experiences, the things I stuffed up along the way, and the things that I had successes in along the way. So for me, it's a natural thing to want to be able to share that experience, and in the classroom is probably the best place to do it. But looking at that, I think too, I know we were talking before we started a bit about AI, how that will really change the nature of training and delivery of training across the country. And that's going to be exciting to see that come in my lifetime.
So I guess the phrase powering skills organization is going to come up now. It's probably an organization that people in our side of the industry, they've probably only just started hearing about. People who have listened to this podcast, I did an interview with Paul Vivian a couple of weeks ago now. So let's go there. What is Powering Skills Organisation? What's its remit? What is its purpose in life?
Yeah, look, Powering Skills Organisation is one of 10 jobs and skills councils. And to sort of break it down, over the years, we've had the federal governments of each prescription look at vet training, vocational education training, and work out, well, how do we fix this? What's wrong with it? How can we make it better? And the Joyce report came out and sort of recommended that there needed to be a glue essentially between industry and the training world. And the jobs and skills councils essentially are that glue that helps bind the two parts together, because when you look at a jobs and skills council, our remit is to look after the training packages. So the stuff you go to TAFE to do, or go to a private or industry training provider to do, but also to look at workforce development. So what are the challenges that industry are facing in trying to build their workforces? Is it a knowledge and skills element, or is it that and something else? Is there an inherent industry issue that's preventing people coming to the industry? And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later with what we're doing with CEDIA in particular. But going back, one of the 10 JSCs, Powering Skills Organisation, has been in existence about 2 years now. And our remit is the energy sector. And that's a pretty broad sector. And you're thinking, how does that work in with home automation and system integrators and things like that? But we look after 4 training packages. So that's the UEE, UEG, P, and T. So if you want to try and remember it, think of Chat GPT, but just take out the chat and put UEE in front of it, and you tend to remember it. But they cover everything from the standard electricians, so for anything from the domestic electrician whacking in PowerPoints and lights in your house, all the way through to the big commercial industrial electrical installers. But we also look after the gas transmission industry, so that's gained a lot of attention probably more recently, particularly on the East Coast, where gas is used primarily as a backstop to coal-fired generation. And then also we look after transmission and distribution. So they call that the ESI industry, the electrical supply industry. And so they look after the generation. So your old school coal-fired power plants, gas-fired power plants, hydroelectric schemes, and then equally too looking at things like the big power lines that go in between all of those things. So it's a very broad remit. But coming back probably more specifically to the people listening to this podcast, we look after the electronics, data and voice communications, and arguably system integration, because it's a big part of what you do in this space is still related to the energy sector via the fact that it's part of the electrotechnology world.
And I mean, when you look at the whole energy sector, obviously we're talking and focusing on a very small industry as part of that. But I would imagine there's a lot of small industries that have kind of sat on the periphery for a long time, like systems integration. How have you gone about to ensure that they've actually had a seat at the table and haven't just been drowned out by, the larger electrical industry? Because obviously that's quite large by comparison.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and something is we took on very early in the day. When we first started, we had a kickoff meeting in Brisbane, and I've got some great photos I could probably share later of me staring at whiteboards and drawing all these strange hieroglyphs on the wall. But one of the things we identified pretty early was that importance of making sure that we listen to all the voices in the room, not just the loudest voice in the room. And to be fair, a lot of those bespoke industry sectors like electronics, and within electronics, you would probably include people like the system integrator, you know, they haven't had that voice at the table because whether or not the industry association hasn't been of the same, I guess, political sway as some of the larger ones like your National Electrical Communications Associations, Master Electricians, the unions, the ETU, etc. They've got a seat at the table nationally. But when it came to things like CEDIA and other associations, I think, the fire protection associations, the security ASIAL type organizations, sometimes they weren't as heard. And so they sort of got lumped in, and a lot of the decisions were being made by people that weren't actually practitioners. They weren't part of the industry. They might have been someone who had a bit of an interest in it, but the voice wasn't there. So we didn't really achieve what I guess that part of the industry needed, your part of the industry needed, which was an opportunity to say, hey, well, here's some training that we do. Here's the role that even OEM training and some of the industry specific training has. And how do we align that so people actually say, hey, there's a job here? Because clearly when we look at the home entertainment area is something that's people have been growing and growing. Like, there's a reason why JB Hi-Fi sells so many big screen TVs, but equally too at that top end of the market. And we're seeing that people are wanting to commit to high-end electronics in their homes. So whether it's in the home theater or just even the whole home integration, smart homes have really become something that people are very keen for. And I think ultimately it still builds back into or plays back into the bigger picture of looking at renewable energy and sustainable energy, because you can't really have a conversation about generating clean energy or green energy without understanding who's using the energy. Easy to get caught up in the big power stations and them supplying the big industrial complexes. So we know that if you're making iron ore, if you're smelting aluminium and all of those things, yes, you need tons of electricity. And it's very handy to have a big power station on your doorstep to make those things work. But ultimately, there's a couple of million homes around Australia. The vast majority of people go home and live in a house, so they're going to have to have a need for electricity in that environment. And people are very conscious of the power bills and things like that. So we know that when we look at home automation and home integration, we're going to see it probably get a lot bigger in this space, particularly when it comes to looking at energy efficiency devices and being how to work those into other aspects of your home life. Not forgetting that, people do love entertainment. Like we do, we're a bit of a streaming world these days, and being able to access high quality entertainment and enjoy it in the environment that you enjoy best is something that clearly this part of industry is growing, and we want to be able to support that.
So I know when the announcement was made about the Power and Skills organisation, when we caught up over in WA, I think it was you were kind of halfway in the transition into PSO at that point. Look, I told you a lot of the horror stories that I had trying to get something up and running. It had been a shit show for years. So I kind of ran as soon as you said PSO is happening. I kind of ran to it and thought, okay, well, this might be our opportunity. Have you found the same with other organizations that have kind of run with it? Or are you also seeing some of the smaller guys who might have been burnt for a long time just kind of sit and go, oh, yeah, sure, it'll happen?
Well, hats off to both yourself and Paul Vivian as well for having the courage to actually go and interrogate and actually share some of those horror experiences that you've had in the past, because it forced us to even rethink it. So while we had committed to saying, hey, we want to hear every voice, we want everyone to have a seat at the table and not just listen to those loudest voices in the room, we also probably recognized that we didn't really know how to get to those voices. That's a big part of where the picture hadn't been colored in as yet. So the opportunity that presented itself to be able to go and use CEDIA to be able to go and reach out into your industry and say, hey, what do you want? What is it that you want? We're not going to tell you. You have to come back and tell us. Otherwise, you'll just be in the same boat you've always been in. But arguably coming to that thought process of, well, you know your industry. You know what knowledge and skills you want your people to have to be able to perform the kind of work that brings the results. And I think that was something that we hadn't thought of initially, but the model that we've used with CEDIA and looking at that Cert 3 in system integration has really helped us go, all right, well, that's the model we can take forward for, I guess, some of those more bespoke, smaller industry sectors. And so, in all honesty, that's going to benefit a lot of other areas. So congratulations being the trendsetter there for us. And
I'm hearing guinea pig, not trendsetter.
Well, no, but like the reality is guinea pigs. Yeah, arguably, it's not how we see it. We see it as this is now the template for good system design. It's how we should be doing industry engagement. There's no shortage of loud voices in the electrotech space. There's clearly some very big players who have been determining the direction that we take some of those, I guess, particularly the license qualifications, and understandably so because of the role they play in legislative requirements. But where things fall outside of a licensing world, but still have a big play in the consumer market and what people want, well, then this is the model that we have now. And I think it works for us because we get a very clear picture of how to craft those qualifications that suit industry. Probably on the back of it, one of the worst things for us is when we look at a qualification, and particularly some of the ones that we're looking at now that haven't been used for any period of time or have very low or no enrollments, we get worried because we think, well, is it because it's not right? Is it not fit for purpose? And therefore, that's why people don't want to use it? Or was it created without any real concept of what the industry outcome is? So what's the job at the end of it? And I think that's something you and I have had a discussion with. Certainly, Paul Vivian and I have had this discussion over the years as well. Is what's the job? Like, if you're in year 9, year 10, 11 at school, and you're thinking, hey, I'm entering the last years of my schooling. What am I going to do for a job? And you find out, actually, I love my home theatre. And whether or not you're playing games in there or streaming or whatever else is, imagine that's your day-to-day job. Imagine you're out there designing these beautiful home theatre systems for the top end of town, and you're playing with equipment that just blows my mind. Like you look at some of the stuff that is being installed these days, and whether it's the high end technical equipment or the awesome seats that you have that you can sit in, and they've got heating and cooling cups and all this sort of stuff. Like it's a whole industry, and I think that's the key. Is it's an industry that you can have a career in, and you can maybe start as an apprentice or a trainee in that space, move your way all the way through into potentially running your own company and being awarded for some of these great installs you see. So wind that all the way back to the start of this conversation. That's something that we had to change our mindset around. It's like, well, this is a qualification that leads to an outcome that is a job for someone and an industry that actually needs those workers. So let's work with industry to get what they want rather than we tell them what we think they need.
So I do remember when other Paul came to me and showed me the framework that existed for the Certificate 3 in Custom Electronic Integration, the obsolete course. And I remember looking at that thinking, this is a Frankenstein's monster. It was absolutely horrific to kind of wade through and try and figure out what it actually was. I can only imagine what that would have been like looking at every single qualification that existed under the energy umbrella. How many people within PSO actually were involved in assessing those courses, and how did you actually go around thinking, First of all, I don't want to quit. And what do we actually do with this?
Oh my goodness. Yes. PSOs, we're sitting around about 35 people at the moment, and probably by the end of the year, we'll be closer to 50 people working across the different industry sectors. Not everyone's playing in the training package space. Some of our teams obviously look at workforce development and data research and some of those areas, as well as our support services. But probably bringing it back to that thought of looking at the training package. To be fair, there's been some great work done. And, we can't ignore the fact that previous iterations of the PSO model, so before this, we had what they called skills services organisations. They were almost like a transitional period in between what came before that, which was the industry skills councils. So EOS being one that most people would be aware of if they've been around training for some time, particularly in the electro energy space. Uh, uh, yes, there's a lot of stuff out there. But we've also been able to harness some of the tools. Like the reality is AI has allowed us to do comparos, so we don't have to sit there and grunt our way through looking at, what this is and what that is. But also too, we've been empowered to some degree by the government, and the way that they structured the JSC model was they really wanted us to sort of take the lid off it, really start looking at the bits and pieces under the hood and go, right, well, what is working, what's not working from a training package perspective. And the first thing we really wanted to get our thought around is those low and no enrollments, because the danger you have is, like, as I said, we need to know why, but sometimes things that aren't being used have been used for a different purpose. So you still need to maintain it for that reason. But equally too, if things that have just been cut and paste and got a green tick, oh yeah, we'll leave that there because there's nothing wrong with it and no one's told us anything's wrong with it, may not necessarily be the right thing too, particularly when you look at some of the outdated technology. And ICT space is a perfect example of it. So we work closely with Future Skills Organisation, who have carriage over the ICT package, and you can't really talk about system integration without talking ICT. So arguably our role isn't to look at, how to set up TCP IP networks and stuff like that. It might be a little bit of what we do, but ultimately when you get into the network side of things, big data center comms type things, that's the world of FSO. PSO really looks more, I guess, at the energy side of things, the electrical side of things. So it's a balancing act we have to have in that space. But it probably comes back to that thought of how much has that technology changed as well, and how much of it still lived in the old training package. We had 2 units of competency that you need for your open cabling registration. ICT package has an equivalent of it. And we were still teaching how to put in 50 pair telephone cables and set up mode 3 sockets and these type of things, which arguably is becoming a thing of the past. Like, let's face it, when's the last time someone actually picked up an old school hand, plug-in phone at home and listened for the dial tone to be able to talk? Yeah, I don't have a telephone line in my house. I haven't had one for years. So arguably that's what we're seeing now. So when those things are living in the training package, probably where we find the problem is the students themselves start to get into that position where, why am I being taught this? So you're disengaging the student right from the start of their career. And from an employer's perspective, they're going, why are they learning that? We don't use that technology. We haven't used that technology for years. They're the kind of things that now, going back to that thought of when we cracked open the training package, we said, well, what is current knowledge and skills that industry are wanting? And the only way we're going to know that is go back to industry and ask them the question. What is it? I use the example in my electrical world. When I was an apprentice, I learned how to make up what they call a Ross Courtney. Now, if you're an electrician and you're sort of over the age of 40, 45, maybe 50 like me, you might have seen one in 1990 when they were phasing them out because we used lugs and other things since that time period. So that's just one really bad example or good example of bad things that happen in training packages where we think, they have to know that just in case. And it's often those just in cases that are the things that are demoralizing to the trainers. Absolutely no benefit to industry because you've moved on and you don't want that trained anymore because you don't see it. So there is some argument for keeping some of the legacy stuff in there where potentially it could be something you need to integrate with. But for the most part, this is one of the big things that PSO and the other JSCs were tasked with, was working out how to increase the speed to market of training products. So you'd probably be able to answer the question better than I could. But if you looked at the technology you're using today compared to 5 years ago, it's moved on so far. Why would you train what was 5 years old? So, yeah.
And I guess that was going to be kind of what my next question was going to be. When you're talking about technology that is obsolete or been phased out, I mean, obviously it takes time to develop training resources. What's the plan moving forward to make sure that we're not in the same position where in 10 years' time someone goes, "Oh, hang on, we we're a bit behind here."
Yeah, no, good point too, because there are certain things that I guess are immutable. Like they're always going to be there. And I think that's where training package design really is now starting to go, all right, we need to pick this up. We need this to really understand how, if we want to make something future proof, the best way to do it is not be overly specific when it comes to things that are prone to change. So a good example of that would be is running a cable is running a cable. That really doesn't change. You know, if you're running it through a ceiling, running it through a conduit or a duct, or running it underfloor, that's kind of what it is. The cable might change, or the method of running it through might change. So rather than be specific about describing that task with a particular piece of technology or equipment, maybe broadly look at what the skill is required for that, and then work that into, say, your core. But looking at the elective streams or the optional components that you can put into a training package, that's where we can be a bit more flexible and utilize that. So we might say for the qualification, let's use this one, the Cert 3 system integration one, system integrator. There's going to be core stuff that you want them to know. The elements of audio haven't changed. You know, the way decibels work, and how you describe decibels, and how the impact you have, and how volume versus power, and all of that. You know, I'm talking like I'm an expert, and clearly I'm not. But you know, the reality is there'd be a whole bunch of your listeners are probably sitting there going, "Yeah, that hasn't changed. We know that to get this amount of volume, you need this amount of power into an amplifier, yada yada." That's immutable. How you use and what that amplifier looks like has changed immensely. And when we look at, I guess, digital signal processing, things like that, you wouldn't want to say use X brand or Y brand, or maybe even a proprietary technology that exists within those brands. Rather look at how does the skill work in relation to that, and then make that an elective component within that qualification. So arguably, you're no longer going down that pathway of saying you have to learn this and now it's outdated. You have to learn this part because that'll never be outdated. This part that could be outdated, we're now going to replace that with this, and you can bring that to market a lot quicker. So that's probably where the model has changed somewhat, because previously you'd release a training package and it would stay like that for 4, 5, 6 years. In the case of the recent change, we had an 11 package that went to a 20 package and was still being delivered 3 years later. So the best part of almost 10 years, which in the technology space is like the dark ages to, you know, the Enlightenment. How are you going to, you know, capture that new knowledge and skills that are there? So you do it through better training package design, not putting things into the core thinking, oh, we need this person to know this, but it might change. If it's not going to change, make it core. If it's going to change, make it an elective, and then you can play around a bit more in that space. Probably the second thing that has really opened our eyes up to is the role that OEM training and, I guess, industry-based training like CEDIA does. So when you look at the CEDIA training model, it's a great model. You know, like, you know, maybe others disagree with me. I would hope they wouldn't. But when I look at it, it has a rigor to it. There's a requirement that sits behind it that industry has noted. This is what we are setting as the standard for our world. If you are CEDIA registered, if you've done their training, if you've gone through their programs, you are recognized by your industry as being of top quality. So why would you then try and replicate that into a training package? Rather, why don't you make the training package, build it around that kind of accreditation? And you probably see that in other industries done a bit better than we've done it in the past. So a good example of that would be in the business world. If someone goes off to do their, say, a course with the Australian Institute of Management or the Australian Institute of Company Directors, we're seeing that universities have tended to accept that as saying, hey, that's equivalent to this in our. So when we're issuing a degree like maybe an MBA, we recognize that component of it, and you don't have to redo it at the university. In the TAFE system or the VET system, we haven't necessarily gone down that pathway as effectively. But now we are, because we're saying if you do the CEDIA course, we've already seen that it maps exactly to the qualification now. You're not going to have to do it again. You have the evidence, and it's not really having to do a full RPL type assessment on someone. You've already done it. It's equivalent. Mapping exercise done. Here's your CDA qual. Here's your Cert 3 qual. Off you go. You don't have to do any more. And that's how it should be, because it's a high quality training system that's being recognised by the industry and now formalised through the national training system.
Connected Magazine is your go-to publication for the commercial and residential AV and smart home industry. For decades, integrators have been fighting for proper industry recognition. In the latest edition, we take a deep dive into what people across the sector, both commercial and residential, are doing to change that. You'll find this story and more in the latest edition of Connected Magazine, plus all of the latest AV news and product updates online. Check out the links in this episode's description. Ethical technology design is no longer optional in the connected home. On July 29, the CEDIA Ethical Technology Design Conference, a virtual Australian-led event, dives into the role of ethics in system design, from privacy and safety to accessibility and well-being. Discover how integrators can deliver smarter, more responsible outcomes for clients. Register today at cedia.org. So I'm interested because obviously we do run a lot of training within the world of CEDIA, but also as an industry, there's a lot of technical training out there, and it can be an absolute battle to get technically minded people to sit education. You're obviously looking at the energy sector. This is all technically minded people. So how engaged have they been in the process, or have they been quite hands off because they either think they know it already or they just don't care?
Probably haven't seen that. Well, to be fair, the energy industry and in particular the electrotech industry has deeply invested in the vet sector for a long time. There's certainly no shortage of people who want to be involved and put their 2 cents in. And I think that's been great to see. Probably less so in the OEM space. I think and clearly there's been OEM training that's been recognised in different industry sectors as of being of equivalent quality to what CEDIA puts out. But so, like, give you a couple of examples of that. So in the electrical space, CBus has been used for years and years. I'm sure many of your listeners would probably know it as well. So CBus training was something that Clipsal put out, Clipsal Schneider. Clearly, people who did that training were trained quite well in how to put a CBus equipment in, but ultimately it was a lighting control system which lives within the training package. But if someone did CBus training, we weren't able to recognise it in the lighting units that live in the electrical qualification. Ergo, you could probably pick that up in the security side of things and say the fire things, where there's been manufacturers say, hey, we'll train you in how to install our product from the control panel to the devices out in the field. Calibrating certain parts of that, etc. So that training exists, and it's high quality training. So the people have had it there, and there has been an openness to doing that training. But I think they're probably just as far behind, if not further behind, than probably what CEDIA has been with, or not CEDIA, but like the players in the industry as to how to make those two things work together. So probably one of the reasons why I'm so excited about what we're able to do here, because as I say, we're breaking the ground, and I think that'll actually end up being the model that we carry forward. And I think across the broader energy industry, so if we look at all the things that we look after at PSO, when we think about things like wind turbines and large-scale solar, that's a whole world of training that OEMs have. A lot of it comes from Europe. It's under the IEC standards, so we know it's of the highest quality. Australia are adopting a lot of the IEC standards and utilising them as part of our Australian and New Zealand standard setting has really opened the door for us to be able to go, well, hold on, like if you're being trained in Germany or France or the Netherlands, wherever it may be, clearly that training is just as good, if not better, than what we can do here. Let's adopt that training here and utilise it in that space. So therefore, if it falls outside of nationally recognised training, how can we make the nationally recognised training model accept that in so that we can utilise it and save people having to do things twice? I think it's the definition of madness, isn't it? If you're a trained person and you already hold all of these OEM qualifications and they're done on IEC-based standard equipment, how's it going to be any different here in Australia? Arguably, electrical licensing slightly different because of what we do, but it's moving more and more towards that as well.
And there'd be the added benefit there too of resources for RTOs and TAFEs. If they can go through an OEM and get that, then we don't have to rely on the TAFEs to have equipment that it can be expensive,
Mm,
and they need instructors as well. So it helps from that perspective, but also it gets students going through it to be job ready.
yeah. Oh,
Having that underlying knowledge is great, but if you're actually trained in a system that your employer wants you to be trained in, even better.
yeah. And the transferability of it too, like you might have done OEM training on one brand of equipment. To be brutal, the percentage change between that and another piece of equipment isn't going to be 100%. Yeah, and I know manufacturers will say, "Oh, ours is much better, and this is much better." Of course, it is. Yeah, that's how you work. You work in a commercial world. I get that, but arguably, there's only so many ways that you can use that equipment. But I think that then broadens the experience for the user and for the practitioner themselves. Is that they can go, "Yeah, look, I'm an expert in this product, but I'm also an expert in this product." And clearly that's going to then meet the end users' needs because ultimately they're the ones making the decision on what equipment they buy. But going back probably to your point on TAFEs and the cost of setting up training, there's only so many rooms available in the TAFE system. There's only so many workshops available. And clearly for some time we've had a massive shortage of trainers in the vet space. There's currently a number of programs running around. One of them we're looking at is the Vet Workforce Blueprint that all of the jobs and skills councils were given. We know there's not enough electrical trainers in the industry. I'm going to guess there's probably even less in the system integration space. So if you've got a shortage there, you're going to have a shortage amplified in your world. So therefore, just putting stuff into a classroom and TAFE isn't going to help the problem. But we sort of use the analogy a bit of the bus and bus driver and bus route. So, we can have all the buses we like. If we don't have enough bus drivers, no one's going anywhere. But equally too, you need the passengers as well. And I think that's the other part of this conversation, probably jumping ahead a little bit here, but how do we find more of those young people who are wanting to come into industry and know that there is a training pathway for them? That's not something we're seeing an awful lot in this sector yet. How do you get in front of the career guidance counsellor? How do you get at the jobs fairs and say, "Hey, have you ever thought about becoming a system integrator?" And most people go, "What? What is this thing you speak of?"
To
But
be fair, some of them would react that way if you said, "Have you considered becoming a sparky or a plumber as well?" Because guidance
absolutely.
counsellors are notorious for pushing uni and not trades.
Yeah, and look, that's something that you have to change the mindset of the decision maker, but also to the decision influencers. And a lot of time that is parents and guardians. We know that a lot of people will make their decision about a career based on what their parents did. Why are you a plumber or why are you a sparky? Well, dad or mum was a plumber or sparky, so okay, well that makes sense. But how many people in the system integration world have their kids coming through and saying, "I want to do that because mum and dad did it"? Now, hopefully there are, but equally too, that's not enough to rebuild your industry. You need to grow the industry. So how do you attract people into it? And I think that's where probably some of the work that's being done in other areas could be equally applied here, is looking at how you influence the school kid to think about careers that may or may not interest them, but link it back to what they're doing at school. So, back in my day, quite clearly, if I know this is an audio only one, but I'm very grey haired and grey bearded, but we loved it. When you're in year 4, year 5 in the early '80s, and suddenly the teacher's pulling out this great big cart with an old CRT TV and the old school, VCR, the one that used the big tape. It's probably a proper name for that thing, but yeah.
And it was strapped down as well. That entire
Oh, if
VCR
that
was
thing fell
strapped
over,
down.
you were killing kids. It was like Stonehenge falling over, but the reality was, it was a great thing for kids to see because, you sit there and you'd watch. Back in my day, it was Behind the News, and it was the best half hour of your day. Now, the reality is that has now changed. We have YouTube and we have all of these other technologies that people are using. You go to a classroom now, and they have a smart board at the front. The kids walk in. There's no one taking a role. They press their name on a screen, and it automatically updates the student management system in the class. So take that kind of technology and apply it in the home theatre world or the system integration world. Clearly, those kids are already seeing that type of stuff. Imagine if they knew that's actually a job you could do. You could get paid to do that and paid handsomely. and you're working with some of the coolest tech around. Like, to me, that's like game over. Of course, you're going to want to do that. And that's me talking as an ex-Sparky, but that's where I think a lot of that mindset change has to be, and arguably just relying on the TAFE system to build classrooms and put systems in there and say, hey, we're going to train you in it. You'll end up with the same situation we've had in the past where people go, I don't know about it. I can't enroll in it. And even if you do enroll in it, it's probably not really what you're doing in the real place, in the workplace, because it's antiquated training. So fix the training by utilizing what the current technologies are out there and getting the right information into the training package, which is what we're doing with CEDIA.
It was definitely funny a couple of years ago because I've been doing a lot of work with what's now called the industry school up in Queensland, and we brought a bunch of kids from the school to our tech summit at SeaWorld, and we sat them down to do a presentation about the industry because they had no idea. And we started to go through what the industry looks like, what roles were there, and you could tell they did not care in the slightest until we started showing photos of home cinemas, listening rooms, touch panels that they could actually see were fully customized. And then all of a sudden, they couldn't wait to go and play with the technology. And yeah, they go down there and they're still looking at cables and things like that. But they have in their head they could work in really cool environments because that's what they're interested in. So it comes down to how to sell it. And I find that some industries, and we've been horrible at this in the past too, is we sit there and we lecture them on the most boring things possible because it is important, but we don't get them in first and then bore them.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And probably to some degree, the environment that home system integrators are working in, like it's a bit hard to bring a busload of kids into someone's, $10 million mansion and show them the $1 million home theatre. I'm not sure the owner of that $10 million mansion, there's probably not even a mansion in Sydney and Brisbane and Melbourne these days. That's like your standard suburban home cost, isn't it? But
An apartment.
an apartment, yeah. Perth, where I am, is it's not much different in all honesty. But yeah, it's a different world. But that really highlights one of those things is we know that not everyone's going to want off to be a construction Sparky or a renewable energy Sparky or whatever. We know that there is going to be a group of people who have a great passion for this type of stuff. How do you ignite that passion and then turn that passion into an actual career? And that's what, I think by fixing some of the problems that we can fix at PSO in the way that training packages are designed, and then helping the training providers, whether it be the government-based TAFE or industry training or OEM training, as we're doing with CEDIA, getting that right so that people can see, hey, this is something I really like doing, and build that excitement up.
And I'm just going to take the opportunity to have a personal gripe here. I get really, really angry when I see universities send students through a journalism degree because I've met a lot who have graduated that were illiterate and there's not enough jobs in the industry. And I get so angry because these kids are getting a $30,000 HECS debt with no opportunity whatsoever for a career. But that's just my personal gripe. So
Well, you're probably not alone there. And look, to be fair, university education is suitable for many people. Like, let's face it, without a university sector, a lot of research doesn't happen, and we need a good tertiary education system. I tend to agree with you that there's been a less focus on the outcome of what that training and education provides. So it's fairly straightforward if you're thinking I'm going to go in as an engineer or come out as a lawyer, a doctor, an accountant, nurse. You can see the outcome of those roles. But even that, things like journalism is a clear example where things like AI will change that. Even in law, paralegals, they're saying almost becoming non-existent. In the medical field as well, people who do diagnostics, we know AI can diagnose things far better than you can in other spaces. And I guess that's probably slightly away from the system integrated kind of talk, but where AI will influence even my sector, the vet sector, the training sector. We can see technology now being used in applications that you may not have necessarily thought. So gripe that, you shared your gripe. One I know that many people have is the self-checkout at Coles and Woolworths. Everyone loves that one, don't they? Oh, unexpected item in the bagging area, and you go, oh, God, bloody hell, you get the person over and, sorry, I just swore on there. I hope there's no swearing one on this one.
no, but this is a trade podcast. I don't give a shit.
But you know what it's like. You're sitting there and how frustrating is it? Oh, damn it, something's in the... So you call over the attendant. And what's the first thing they do? They bring up the screen and they can actually see what you scanned or what you didn't scan or what hasn't worked. And that's actually an AI tool. So they've actually got a camera that's watching you and it's working out the process. So pick up device or pick up equipment, scan it. In this case, pick up bag of whatever it is, cat feed, cat food, put it through. It didn't actually go into the bagging area. So we're going to see AI doing that. And that could almost be what you start to see in the training space. And now here's a dangerous thought, but we have a training shortage. How can we utilize AI to make sure that people are doing the task correctly? So in the training environment, it might be that you actually have an AI camera or a series of AI cameras looking at a student performing a task, and they could even probably pick up before they make a mistake. So things that are obviously a bit more dangerous. So I'm working with live equipment, probably in the space of expensive equipment, stopping them from shorting something out or doing something else that's going to cause damage to it. That's where I think AI tools will actually start to really change our landscape of training and education. And that's going to be scary for some people, but the brutal reality is it's already here, even if it annoys you at the checkout.
Obviously, we've identified there is an issue around attracting people to the market. I remember when I went to a all-day roundtable that the PSO put on, and it was talking about some of the issues that the energy sector as a whole were facing. So I wanted to kind of bring up a couple of those because the systems integration market's not immune to these challenges either. So what are some of those other challenges that have been identified from our industry's perspective?
Probably one of the biggest ones we would literally go back to the school environment again is that base level of the foundation skills, essentially. So we're seeing things change over the years. We know that soft skills are something that are really important for employers, being able to communicate at a level that helps people achieve what they want to achieve. So break that down a little bit further. If you're talking to a client, you need to be able to understand the client's needs and then convert those needs into a solution that meets those clients' needs. How do you train someone in that? How do you inform them of what that skill set is? I've got a nearly 21-year-old daughter. She's quite a verbose young woman, so she's quite happy to talk. But equally too, I've got mates who've got 21-year-old sons, and they speak in caveman. They grunt their whole life way through. So traditionally, that's been our cohort of students, and we're seeing a better gender diversity come into our industries. We can talk about that in a minute, but arguably going back to that thought process, how do you teach soft skills to a 20-year-old person who, for the most part of their life, has sat behind a computer screen playing Fortnite, Minecraft, potentially may or may not like talking to other people, and suddenly we're telling them, you actually have to talk to a client here. You actually have to understand the customer's needs and not just go, oh, I think you want this. No, let's break it down. Then when you've done that, you actually then have to talk to your employees or other workers and be able to integrate with it. Nothing happens in isolation. So in the trade world in particular, those soft skills are something that we still see are being to some degree a bit lacking in how we train those. That's an issue that we face across the board. I'll probably say the thing that we notice in the energy industry is the massive gender diversity gap. It is a male-dominated industry, and there's a couple of things that sort of flow on from that. And it's the same in the system integration world. There's obviously some great women at the City Awards last year. It was great to see some of the system integrators there, and you have a far better gender balance than probably some other sectors in industry. But classic thing that you'll always see is that where there's a gender imbalance in industry, and I'll highlight it's the same whether it's a male-dominated or a female-dominated industry, you'll then probably also have an age issue as well. So you tend to have an aging population of workers. So if you looked at it, take outside of this world, but say in the ESI, the transmission, distribution, electricity generation world, their average age of their workers is in the 40s. So if your average age is in the 40s, that means you've got a lot of people probably in your 50s and 60s because there's still quite a few people in their 20s and 30s working. But you're almost having a position where you're going to run out of young people in your industry. And that's really dangerous when it comes to things like high technology industries such as system integration. And it does highlight that problem. If you have a male-dominated industry, there's probably a good chance that they're also going to be older men, and they create their other problems. And then also is it an inclusive workplace, so people want to come and work in that space. If it's dominated by old cranky men, well, probably not. So we see that a lot in the energy industry, probably to a lesser degree in this industry, the system integration, high end sort of technology type industries, but it's still there to a degree. So I think that's one of the challenges we have to overcome is again, how do we attract more women into industry? Not because we just simply want more women, but we know that we have all this work that needs to happen across all these industry sectors. We need a bigger workforce, and leaving people behind is not something we want to do or see in industry. So yeah.
That's it. Yeah, we don't want to shut off half the population because they're potential members of the workforce.
Absolutely. Yeah. And history tells us that if we look at the underemployed or unemployed numbers, the women are vastly overpopulated in that space. Like there's way more women unemployed and underemployed than there are men. So clearly, if you're trying to build a workforce, why wouldn't you try and employ those people who for the most part do want a job? And arguably, probably things like system integration is one of those workplaces that might even be more family friendly and friendly to women entrants, because not everyone wants to start at 5 a.m. in the morning, 6:30 in the morning. Like there are things that you can sort of work around if you can start later in the day, and this industry is one of those ones that probably supports that.
I think too, there's always that stereotype of when you are dealing with end users, if it is a, man and a woman, the man is the one who's so on board with technology and wants to do it everything. It's the woman who's the hard sell. If you actually have a female integrator there who is doing the selling, it's a far easier conversation because there's more of a recognition that the female in that relationship's not sitting there going, "I'm being ganged up on."
Absolutely, absolutely, and like at the risk of delving into sort of gender based ideologues and things like that, but there's probably nothing more frustrating than you getting that phone call. How do I put Netflix on? Why isn't what input do I need to put on this computer? And like seriously, I get that from my parents still. So it's not just a gender thing; it's an age thing that we have to factor in. But you're right. Like how often is the decision maker when it comes to big family purchases? And in terms of sort of vehicles and home theaters, a lot of the time it feels like it should be the man, but it shouldn't be. It should be whoever's going to be using that technology or that device in the household or in their lives. So, when you defer to thinking about that, maybe you would have better outcomes for the homeowner if we had more women in the industry. And be equally too, we don't want to lose men out of the industry, because if you replace them all with women, you'll just create another problem. So, like I said, a female-dominated industry had the same problem as the male-dominated industry, just in the reverse way. Thinking, allied health and sort of nursing and that side of things. They have the similar problems in reverse because of the being a female-dominated industry.
So I will say you did kind of concern me a bit there when you said about the average age in their 40s, because I do know that the average age of integrators in Australia is 43. So it did make me sit there and think, okay, shit, we might have a massive problem coming up soon.
Absolutely, yeah. And look, the aging workforce is something that I think, if as an industry, if you're not thinking about it, you should be, because it sneaks up on you rather rapidly. So to give you an example outside of this world, but like in our world, is the coal industry. Now, I don't think there's a person on the planet who wants to continue on with coal as a future. I know that they're still building coal power stations and other places, but here in Australia, the reality is that the coal workforce, so whether it's in the mining of coal or the use of coal in power stations, is declining rapidly. They're aging. But we still need that stuff to run for another couple of years. So you imagine trying to convince a 20-year-old or an 18-year-old that, look, why don't you come work at a coal-fired power station or work in a coal mine? It's just not going to happen, because they're already against that kind of technology. But the brutal reality is that if you have an aging workforce and you don't address it, it'll creep up on you quicker than you can imagine, and then you're struggling to go backfill. So, it is your trainers, it is the people who are in management, it is the people who are doing the actual install work. All of those areas, you're going to be struggling because there's no one there, and literally no one there. So, yeah, it's something certainly I think addressing it now is something that's absolutely of highest importance for the industry.
So next year, 2026, it will actually mark my 20th anniversary in electrotechnology, which I still think I'm in my 20s. Uh, and sometimes I act like it. But the way I've always known there's been a skill shortage. And this is obviously in the CI channel, but also in the electrical sector, because I've done a lot of work in that space as well. From that kind of initial roundtable that I went to, where there were statistics that were coming out, some of those numbers were terrifying. So I don't know if you can go into some of those of how many people do we actually need in the energy sector and kind of in the time frame that we need it? Because I know I sat there and thought, okay, we might be a little screwed here.
They're frightening numbers. So a couple of big things probably to sort of preface it before I throw the numbers out there is it depends where Australia sees itself and pitches itself in terms of the energy economy. So what I mean by that is that if we want to use green energy to power our economy and see ourselves as a green energy superpower, and that was the term that was used in the first paper that Jobs and Skills Australia put out about powering Australia, and looking at that, we're talking numbers like 43 to 44, maybe even 45,000 electricians by 2030 to be able to achieve that. Now, that's just electricians. Let's factor that in for a second. 4-year apprenticeship, next year's 2026. In 2026, that gives us 4 years. So by 2030, we need to basically double the amount of apprentices that we have in training just in the electrical space. That doesn't include line workers, cable jointers, HV switchers, then throw all the other elements in. So even in the technician ICT space, all of these things have data components to it. So there's SCADA centers and things like this. All of this stuff has to be done. So in real terms, we don't have enough trainers to train what we currently have. We don't have enough people to train to put into these jobs. So we are looking at transitioning workers from, I guess, the decarbonisation process. So moving people out of those fossil fuel industries across into renewable energy sectors. But all the while we were doing that, we still have houses to build. So we need something like 1 million homes built over the next couple of years. Well, every home has an electrician that's going to work on it. They probably have someone who's now being required to put in home theatre systems and other things as well. And then amplify that, we have some massive CapEx stuff happening around the country as well. So at the moment, we're seeing Brisbane tool up for an Olympics. Well, if we learn anything from the Sydney Olympics, the drain on the workforce is immense. We're talking tens of thousands of workers across construction industry and other related industries that are going to be soaked up into Brisbane while we build all the infrastructure necessary for the Olympics. Meanwhile, we know that there are hospitals being built around the country, and we know that there's probably stadiums being built around the country, and all of these large scale construction projects suck up electrical and energy space workers. So clearly, when we talk about 45,000 electricians, we should be worried because it's a huge number. But that also then presents an opportunity. And, I'm always often joke I'm a bit of a glass half full kind of person. But not only that, I think I'm there and there's two more drinks at the bar waiting for me to drink. So I don't see it all negatively. Australia has been a country that has, for its entire existence, been able to adapt to things that are challenging. And I think that's what we can do now. So whether or not that's utilising new technologies, new methods of training, looking at what we do with our existing workers and being able to harness what we have in our industry, which is some great experts. Like, that's one of the greatest things about my job now at PSO is I get to talk to people like yourself. Paul Vivian and I have long known each other. But for every one of the two Pauls, there's another two Pauls in other parts of the industry, and it's amazing seeing some of the thought process go into play. And a good example of that is the centres of excellence that are being set up around the country. So here in Western Australia, we have Sense, which is the Centre for Renewable Energies, essentially, and they're looking at different modalities of training, like how can we utilize VR and AR, and how can we put people into places that they're not currently there? How do you identify where the shortfalls are in the workforce and be able to address it at a far greater effectiveness than just saying, oh, we'll just pay people more or we'll try and move people there. Think about different ways of doing things. And that's probably the exciting part, I think. So you're right. When you see those numbers, they are frightening. Now, 45,000 electricians, to anyone's point, is a lot of extra people. That's on top of what we're already training. Just I should point out too. That's not 45,000 period. That's 45,000 on top of the 35, 40,000 that are already in training. So there's some great work that needs to happen to make that work. But if Australia does it, And, whether you feel the energy mix should be of a different type, Australia does have abundant light, and we have a lot of natural resources that allow us to create energy in a very environmentally safe and friendly way. We just need to be able to harness the great people and technologies that we have available to us in this country.
So just to clarify, when we say 45,000 electricians, apprenticeships, uh, are we saying that's 45,000 that need to enter the program knowing that the completion rate's not 100%, or is it at 45,000 have to complete the apprenticeship?
Yeah, we need more than 45,000 to start, because you're right, the completion rates on apprentices. And to be fair, the energy sector is probably known as one of the highest completion rates of all the trades. So generally speaking, around that sort of 60 to 70% is the established number. In real numbers, we know it's probably closer to about 90% for most electricians. Um, but we could be people like plumbers. They're sort of sit in the 50s and 60s. They won't be happy with me saying that. But it gets worse. Like if you want to be a baker or a chef, their completion rate's under 50%. So, and in some trades, it's down as low as 30%. So we're fortunate that we have a high completion rate, generally speaking, across the energy sector. But you're right, it's a lot more than you realize. And they're the same people that are going to be competing for when you're a system integrator and all the other allied, I guess, areas of our industry. So yeah, there's some challenges there.
Have you solved them yet? You've
No.
found all 45,000?
Definitely not, definitely not. But yeah, like there is also too that thought process. If you don't try, you won't get. So let's put our best efforts into trying to attract more and more people, and understand that there will be some changes in the way people work as well over the next 5 or 10 years. So let's adopt that thought process into how we find that number. Because if we can't find 45,000, how close can we get? And that's what we really need to find out.
So what can the systems integration industry do from here? So obviously there's the work that Paul and I are doing, working with PSO, but integrators, suppliers, distributors, what should they be doing now? How can they actually help and get involved? Because obviously this is too big of a job just for a handful of people in the industry to push it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, definitely talk it up, like amongst your own selves, like, highlight and showcase the best parts of your industry, because that's clearly going to help in that space. I guess something probably at a larger level, or if we're looking more at like that macro type way of thinking, is as an association, empower CDA as members to go and advocate on behalf of your industry when it comes to things like talking to the state skills ministers, when you are asked to participate in workplace surveys. So, like each state government will always have some kind of occupation list and a priority occupation list. Make sure you feed into that. If you're not working with the state training authorities or the state training boards, that's where you need to get there. But equally too, talk to people like PSO, talk to FSO, Future Skills, because they handle another part of the same area that CDA operates and CDA members operate in. But I think probably the biggest one is that you get the voice out. It's not a loud voice, clearly, because it's a smaller group of people, but such an important group of people. And I think that's the key: is don't doubt for a minute that there are organisations like ours that are listening and will advocate on your behalf, but also to look for ways that we can help grow your industry. But you're right; it can't be done on your own. It is a group effort, and I think that's probably one of the best things that we've seen out of this arrangement and this partnership so far, is being able to try and help raise awareness of what happens in the system integration space. And look forward to continuing on that. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of fanfare when the Cert 3 qual is finally completed and out there, and you've got apprentices and trainees lining up to be part of the industry.
That was Steve Hall from the Powering Skills organisation. And if you've been waiting for someone to fix the skills shortage for you, here's the truth. It's going to take all of us. Yes, there's finally momentum behind the idea of a nationally recognised apprenticeship for smart home technology. And yes, it's part of the national UEE training package. But it won't become a reality unless industry professionals, like you, step up, speak out, and get involved in shaping what comes next. If you'd like to help or simply learn how to make your voice heard, reach out to me directly. I'll let you know what's happening behind the scenes and how you can be part of it. Thanks again to our sponsors Integrate Unlimited and Coliseum for supporting this episode. Thanks for listening to Master Integrator. I'm Paul Skelton. I'll see you next time.